Welcome to Aquated. In this video we are going to discuss a bit of the statistics and the data on aquaculture and fisheries. We've seen that it is predicted that by 2030 62% of the total seafood production will come from aquaculture, okay? But what about the present and how did we get here? So in this graph what you can see is the production in million tons, so this is million tons over here. And in orange you have the capture production, so the fisheries, so the seafood coming from fisheries. And in this blue greenish color you have the aquaculture production, so seafood coming from farming. And what it is clear here is that in the 80s there was almost no farming, and before that it was insignificant in comparison to fisheries. So the total production we had was coming, the majority, 97%, was coming from fisheries. But then going a bit further, later in the 90s, we had 30%, so 10 times more. In 15 years, in over 15 years, we had 10 times more production of aquaculture. And what you can clearly see now is that fisheries is kind of steady, it's stagnant, it's not growing. It's actually fluctuating a bit up and down, but definitely not growing. And aquaculture, for sure it's growing, and today it's almost half of the production comes from aquaculture and the other half from fisheries. So fisheries, it's basically stagnant, aquaculture is growing, and Asia is leading aquaculture. Now, from this graph you can't see that Asia is leading aquaculture, but in this map what you can see actually is the world production in 1950. And you can see it on grey scale. The grey, there is no data, so there's lots. Most of the south hemisphere as either no production, or then you have Indonesia actually with quite a big production, and also Australia with a big production. So these are mainly the countries, and New Zealand also too, that have aquaculture production. Africa doesn't have any production. Okay. So what you can see in this graph, next map, is actually the world production in 1950. So you have grey, there is no production or no data, and in blue 0 to 100, and then you go all the way to yellow where you have 5,000 to 200,000 tons. And in yellow you can see North America, mainly the States, and China and Indonesia as this big production, but it's only 0.6 million tons in 1950, and it's only 2.5 billion people. Now, if you look to 1980, you have 7.2 million tons of production. You have way more people, you have 4.4 billion people, and you can clearly see more countries are now producing seafood from aquaculture. Most Europe, South America is a big, is well represented, with Brazil of course, and Chile already a big production. And China now has a different category, okay? It's between 1 million and 30 million tons. So before we only had up to 1 million, and now we are going up to 30 million tons, and definitely China is leading the way. And in the year 2000, now we have 6 billion people on Earth. We have 41.7 million tons of seafood being produced by aquaculture, and again, it's clearly well represented in Asian countries. And now in 2015, once again we go to another level. We have a red color that we didn't have before, which is over 30 million tons. And we now have in total 106 million tons production and 7.3 billion. So now we can clearly see that the biggest production is in Asia. And if you think as this fish as a total production of seafood in 1980, what you had was 91% was coming from fisheries. 91% of the total world production was fisheries, and only 9% was coming from aquaculture. And what you have now in 2016, it's almost half of it. So 50% coming from fisheries, 47% coming from aquaculture. Now, this is data from FAO 2018. And this is the most up-to-date data that we have for the world production. But this is the world. What about the countries? Because we think as the world, if you would think that you have to fish on your plate, you would say that one comes from fisheries and the other one comes from aquaculture, and this is the type of statement that has been said. But in reality, this is the problem with an average of the entire planet, because when you think about countries, that's a different story. So let's look at Portugal. Portugal is a small country in Europe, but is one of the biggest consumers in Europe. So in 2016, the biggest production was coming actually from fisheries. So 97% is still fisheries and only 3% is aquaculture. If you go to Thailand, okay, Thailand is where I am at the moment, it's here. What you have is still a big component of fisheries and only 28% of aquaculture. But again, because individual countries are different, if you look at Bangladesh, well, Bangladesh is in the opposite situation as Portugal. It has 99% of its production is entirely from aquaculture. So basically, the idea I want to convey is that when you think about the world averages and data, that's very, very well, but that does not represent individual countries. So individual countries may have quite different ways of producing their seafoods. So thank you for listening to this AquaTed video.